you owe the debt. So today we're going to talk about it. First, I want to put a little disclaimer. I am not an attorney. If you need legal advice, please consult with a licensed professional. The first thing I want you to understand, right? A lot of people think once a debt collector contacts them, reports on the credit report, or even sues them, the case is already proven, right? That is not true. A debt collector sending you letters does not prove the debt. A debt collector calling your phone does not prove the debt. A debt collector putting something on your credit report does not prove the debt. Even filing a lawsuit does not automatically prove the debt. What a lawsuit usually means is they are making claims and asking the court to agree with them, right? So there's a difference between an accusation and proof, right? There is a difference between claiming money is owed and actually proving that that money is owed, right? And that mindset matters because if you think everything is already proven, you start acting scared, you start rushing different processes that you can take your time with, and you start acting off of emotions rather than pure strategy, right? And that is when people make mistakes. They admit things too quickly. They agree to balances they never check. They ignore defenses. They settle cases that they may have had all of the leverage in. So I need you to shift how you look at debt collection. Don't look at it like, oh, they contacted me, so I lost. Look more at it like they made a claim. Can they prove it, right? Because the burden of proof is always on them. That one question changes everything. Once you start asking for proof, records, ownership, dates, math, right? Weak files start showing themselves. You wouldn't know it was a weak file though until you start asking certain questions, right? The collector may have a strong case, they may have a weak case, but you don't know that just because they sent the letter. And that is why education matters as well. That's why I'm here. Do not give them automatic credibility just because they are loud, aggressive, or using legal language. Claims are one thing, proof is another. Remember that when you guys are going through this process. All right? What they need to prove. Now let's talk about what actually needs to be proven, right? This is where people get power back. Because once you understand the pieces of a case, you stop being intimidated by the paperwork, as a lot of people are. A debt collector cannot just walk in and say, they owe us money, and that should be the end of it. They usually need to prove several core things, right? First, they need to prove they have the right person. That means they need to connect the account to you, not just someone with a similar name, old addresses, right? Files get mixed up all the time. In my mentorship classes, we go over, how files can get mixed up, how they purchase data. So a lot of stuff can happen during that time, right? Especially mixed files. Second, they need to prove a real account existed, not just, a number in a database, right? A real underlying account or obligation they claim that you had, right? Third, they need to prove the amount they are asking for is correct. If they say you owe $6,000, where did that come from? What was the interest? What were fees? Were credits applied? Were payments missed in their records, right? All of that stuff matters. The next thing, they need to prove they have the legal right to collect. If they are not the original creditor, how did they get the account? In my mentorship, we go over that as well. How did they get the account? Was it sold? Was it assigned? Was it transferred? Right? Can they show the chain of assignment? Fifth, they need to prove the lawsuit was filed on time. Even if a debt existed, deadlines still matter. Okay? Deadlines still matter. We see it not only in civil cases, but criminal cases as well. These deadlines matter. And like I tell my students all the time, it's a twofold when you're dealing with legal obligations as far as credit and debt collection and things of that matter, because it's not, especially in a court sense, when creditors and debt collectors are suing you, because for real, if not more, the same seriousness as it is to prove a case is the same seriousness as it is the rules of civil procedure. So if you don't follow the rules the correct way, let's just say, for example, there's some evidence that needs to be submitted, but you don't submit it in a certain deadline or in a certain way, or you don't serve the other party, or what your things like that actually matter to the case, right? The next thing They need to prove their records can be used, right? Who created the records, right? Who created these records? Who maintains them? Who's testifying, right? Because sometimes they'll have people that come and testify. Who can they explain the documents? Can they authenticate them, right? Now, why am I telling you this, right? Because most people only hear you owe. Soon as you hear you owe, that's when all the questions need to start. This is where the proof. You owe, prove. They say you owe, prove. I say prove. Prove my identity. Prove the account. Prove the balance. Prove the ownership. Prove the timing. Prove the records. Right? This is how you start seeing lawsuits like strategy instead of fear. Okay? Proving it is you, right? Now let's talk about identity, because this is one of the first things they need to prove, right? A lot of people assume if a collector has their phone number, their address, or name, then the case must be solid, right? That is not always the truth. Collectors often work from databases, right? They purchase these big files. They use skip tracing tools, which I go over in my mentorship as well, how they skip trace and the violations that can happen from skip tracing. Old account records, right? Information can be outdated. It can be incomplete, right? It can be tied to the wrong person. So when they say you owe, they still need to connect that account to you, right? That again, that may include things like your full name, your old and current addresses, your partial social security number, phone, email addresses, phone numbers. But again, the issue is people share names. It's another Natasha in the world. People move, right? The same person that has my current address, somebody else had this address before as well. The same number that I have, somebody else had it as well, right? Records get mixed all the time. Middle initials. There may be there's another Natasha Lee, but they have a different middle initial, right? Juniors and seniors get confused, right? Old roommates receive mail, right? That is why proving your identity matters, right? If the collector is suing John Doe, that does not automatically mean they have the correct John Doe, right? And this is also a reason why you don't casually confirm things on calls. That's a big one too. You don't need to help them clean up their file. You need them to prove their file. And in court, identity issues can matter a lot. Wrong person, mixed file, insufficient records, weak connection between you and the account. So when reading the case, ask, how are they connecting this account to me? What records actually identify me? What is assumption versus proof, right? Because if the identity is weak, the whole case can weaken after that, right? Proving the account existed. Okay, so even if they have the right person, they still need to show there was a real account or real obligation behind the claim, right? This is where people get tripped up because they think a collector's system screen is enough. And it isn't that simple. A debt collector saying our records show an account is not the same as showing where that account came from, right? They usually try to prove the account existed through statements, applications, billing history, purchase history, payment history, charge-off records, original creditor records. The stronger the records, the stronger the claim usually looks. But weak files happen, right? Sometimes they have limited data, right? Sometimes they only, have a summary of the information that was transferred from the original creditor to the debt collector, right? Sometimes statements are missing, right? Sometimes there's no clear history showing how the balance developed, right? From start to finish, right? When was it open? What kind of account was it? What activity happened on it, right? What payments were made? When did it default? How did it reach the balance that you're claiming that I owe you right now? You want the story of the account to line up with the records, not just random numbers in their system, because proving a debt is not only about saying an account number that exists and a balance. Yeah, you're telling me these things, but where's the story behind it, right? You have to show documented account history, account level documentation, right? That's super, super important. Proving the amount owed. Now let's talk about the numbers, right? This is a big one, right? A claimed balance is still something that should be supported. If they say you owe $7,200 or any other number, right? There should be a path showing how they got there. What was the original balance? What purchases or charges created it? What payments were made, right? Where are payments missed in the records? If I missed any payments, did you add on any late fees, right? How about the interest, right? Any collection costs associated with it, right? That is the math of the case, right? And if the math is sloppy or inconsistent, that's a huge deal, right? Sometimes balances change from one collector to another, and you need to understand how. It can't be any gaps, right? And again, there's always gaps, which is why I go so deep in my mentorship from how they got a collection to how to it being on your credit report, and thereafter even up into a lawsuit. Same thing with charge-offs. Same thing with all of these debts. These debts can't have any gaps in between them. I need to know how it got from all the way from the original creditor all the way to a debt collector, right? Sometimes the lawsuit amount is different than the charge-off balance. We need to know how we got there, right? All of these things we go over in the mentorship and in the school community, because these are the things that matter. Because sometimes, again, you may think that this creditor has, a strong case because they're just stacking on all of these things. But then as you go along and you start asking questions, people don't know the right questions to ask to see where the weaknesses are. And that's where they fail at, right? Sometimes fees, have no clear explanation. That's another violation, right? You can't just pull a fee out of your behind. What's the explanation behind it, right? This is why you don't automatically admit the balance up front. You make them support that number, right? The balance should be traceable. It should be backed by records, really. If they cannot clearly show how they arrived at the amount they are demanding, then the number itself can become a weak point, right? So when you see a balance, don't just ask or ask how much is the balance. Ask also, how did you calculate it? Where's the documents that support it, right? What changed over time? Because numbers tell stories. And when we start getting into the numbers not making sense, then we start having weak files, right? And then once we start having weak files, that's when we start pointing out and finding out the violations. Because sometimes it's not just surface level. We always, whether that be credit repair, whether that be lawsuits, whether that be charge-offs, creditors, violations on your car contract, dealerships. It always sometimes it's not surface level. It's sometimes when you start asking questions, things that don't add up, that happen on the back end, right? Proving they own the debt. Okay, now let's talk about one of the biggest issues in debt buying cases, right? Is that ownership. If the company suing you is not the original creditor, then they are usually saying one thing: we now own the debt. That sounds simple, right? But let's talk about it, because they do not just need to show a debt existed now, right? Now they need to show they are the party entitled to collect on it, right? Unlike the original creditor, right? Now the debt collector has to show so much more. That means proving how the account got from the original creditor to them. Because sometimes a debt is sold once, sometimes a debt is sold multiple times, right? Original creditor to buyer A to buyer B, right? And then it could be from buyer B to the current plaintiff. So every transfer matters. This is where people hear terms like bill of sale, assignment, purchase agreement, chain of assignment, account schedule, right? Let's say, for example, a generic bill of sale might say seller transferred a portfolio of accounts. Okay, but where is your account in that portfolio, right? Where is the record tying your name, account number, or specific balance to that transfer? That's the difference between we bought some debts versus we bought your debt, and we can prove it, right? So if they cannot connect your specific account through the chain, of ownership, ownership can't be, it can become a pressure point, right? It can become a weak point, right? Maybe a transfer link is missing. Maybe the documents are too generic. This is not the same, document or terms that you agree to, right? Maybe the dates don't line up. Maybe the plaintiff is relying on assumptions, right? This is why debt buyer cases often focus heavily on ownership, because if they cannot not prove they are the right party to collect, that can weaken the entire case. The entire case, right? Proving the file was filed on time, right? Now getting into timing, because even if a debt once existed, timing can still matter. So a lot of people think if someone owes money, the company can sue forever, right? That is not how it works. Lawsuits are usually controlled by statute of limitations, which are deadlines for bringing certain claims. The exact rule depends on your state and the type of case. So when a debt collector files suit, one question can be, was this filed on time, right? That is why dates matter. Important dates, include things like the last payment that was made, when the account first defaulted, when the creditor escalated the balance, if that applies, when the account charged off, when the lawsuit was filed, right? Now, I want to clear up a common confusion. So credit reporting timelines and lawsuit timelines are not the same thing. An account being allowed or not allowed on a credit report is a separate issue from whether someone can sue on it, right? Do not mix those two, right? This is why an old debt can create different questions, right? Maybe it is still being reported. Maybe it's no longer reportable. Maybe it is still, collectible voluntarily, right? Maybe it is too old under your state laws, right? Those are different concepts and timing mistakes that can happen. Wrong last payment date, wrong default date, later dates used to make the case look newer, right? So when timing becomes an issue, the question is not just how old is the debt. Looking at it in a better sense would be, what date starts that legal clock, and was this case filed before that deadline, right? Because even in a case with records can be run into problems if it was filed too late, right? There's been plenty of people that have had to say, oh, well, it's still reporting on my credit report past the statute of limitations. Things can happen. You just always want to double check the dates. Just because it's not reporting on your credit report, for example, it could have been removed. It could have been, who knows, but the credit reporting timeline is not something that automatically matches the how they can come after you timeline, okay? Their witness. Now let's talk about, something that people a lot of the times overlook is the witness. A lot of consumers focus only on paperwork, but documents usually do not walk into court and explain themselves. People do, right? This is why the witness can matter, right? The plaintiff may use an employee, an affidavit signer, right? But here's the thing. Ask them questions as well. It's all about asking questions. Who is this person? Do they actually know how these records were created? Do they work for the original creditor or only the debt buyer, right? Because if you only work for the debt buyer, no, I need somebody from Capital One that can verify, that this is what happened. Do they have personal knowledge of the account, right? Are they just reading your notes that from the screen that of this account that you made up? Can they explain the balance? Can they explain ownership transfers? Can they explain where the dates came from? Can they explain any missing records? Were they even employed? You see where I'm getting here, y'all? Were you even employed when I had an account with the original creditor? If you're saying you're with the original creditor or worked with the original creditor, right? That matters, because someone repeating what a computer says is not the same as someone who can lay out a proper foundation for whatever claims that they're bringing up against you, right? Sometimes the witness can be strong and knowledgeable, right? A lot of the times it's generic. And they know very little about what appears in the actual system firsthand, right? Sometimes affidavits are signed in bulk. Sometimes the person has never even touched the original account records or even seen them on the computer screen. And this is especially important in debt buying cases where records can be transferred from one company to another multiple times, right? One thing I want you guys to remember from this section, the attorney argues the case. The witness often supports the facts. And if the person presenting the facts cannot clearly explain the records, that is the weakness. I love for you guys to understand where the weaknesses happen. Because again, you guys may know a little something, but you don't know how to apply it, right? Because even if I teach you information that is correct, I also want to teach you in real life situations, how do you apply it? How do you know? What does this look like in real life? I like to use that real life. What does this look like in real life? Give me a real life example. All right? Where weak cases break down, right? So let's talk about where weak debt collection cases usually start breaking down, right? And not every case is weak, but many people assume every lawsuit is airtight. That is not true, right? A lot of cases have real gaps, right? And the most common one is those missing records, right? They claim a balance, but they can't show the statements or the payment history. That's a big one. The bad math, right? Numbers change from one letter to another, right? One collector say you owe this amount, then the next one say this amount, right? Then they suing you for a different amount. They always need to check. This is why it's important. You need to know how they got to this balance, right? Another weakness is identity. This is a real big one. Wrong person, mixed file, similar name, right? Because here's the thing. You may say, oh, I did have a Sprint account. Oh, I did have a Verizon account, but it might be another Natasha Lee with that Verizon account around the same. You don't know. You cannot assume just because you can't use you're trying to use your firsthand knowledge of an account, and again, it might be that account, but you don't know. It's up to them to prove it. All right. Ownership, again, is going to be one of those other biggest pressure points. Incomplete transfer chain. That's another one. Unsupported fees. Old lawsuits filed too late. It's one thing after another. And that's also why responding to lawsuits is important too. Because when somebody pushes back, ask for proof. You have to check every single thing. So the lesson is simple. Do not assume a filed lawsuit equals a perfect case. Right? That's it. Yeah. Sorry, y'all. Okay, biggest mistake people make. They assume if they sue me, they already have everything again, and that is just simply wrong. Sometimes they are counting on silence, your fear, or a default judgment, and that is just the honest to God truth. I work with so many people that it's like, yeah, I mean, I did know that I know that they were suing me, but I didn't know. I didn't go because I didn't know what to say. Everybody watching this video, if you found the YouTube channel that teaches you the correct way, that teaches you in layman's terms, that teaches you in such a simple way. And yes, don't get me wrong, laws matter and how you use them matter. And I teach you guys that too. But things like this, I love to teach you guys foundation before we get heavy into the laws and, being specific and technicalities and things of that nature, right? And when you join the school community, there will be no excuses. You're going to learn as if you were an attorney. How to think like one. How to move, how to be strategic. All right? So what we teach inside the community, right? Now, understanding the debt collectors, try to prove a case. The next question becomes, how do you challenge it the right way? That is where most people get stuck, right? They know something feels off, but they do not know how to use the information that they've been taught, right? They notice the balance looks wrong, but they don't know what records to request, right? They see a debt buyer suing them, but they don't know how to challenge ownership. They receive court paperwork, but don't know how to respond strategically or even read the court paperwork, right? That is exactly what we teach inside the community. We go deeper into how to break down evidence piece by piece, right? How to spot weak files, how to understand debt buyer versus original creditor cases, because an original creditor and what you may ask for from them is different from the debt buyer, right? How to respond to lawsuits, how discovery works. That's another big one, right? How motions work. That's another big one that you have to stay on top of, right? How to stop moving in fear and start moving with a plan. The goal is not just for me to motivate you and say, oh, you guys learned a few pieces of information. The goal is education, strategy, and confidence. Because once you have those three things, then you can actually start moving, right? You're at a higher risk of moving forward and actually knocking out these debt collectors and creditors and legal issues that you, well, not this is not legal advice, but these debt issues that you have, okay? Because once you understand the game, you stop feeling powerless in it, right? You know, when you just starting a game and um you're like, wait a second, you feel so like powerless and helpless because you're like, oh my god, I don't know the game, like I don't know how to play. Like when I first when I first started playing blackjack, and I was like, wait, how do you, and I'm losing money, and I'm like, oh my god, I don't know how to play. Wait, hold on, it is going so fast, and it's like I'm losing money at the same time. But once I understood, I was able to make better decisions, and it made me more money versus losing more money. So, but yeah, that's with any game. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. If you have any questions, make sure you put them in the comment section below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Oh, also, if you want to join the community, is in the description below as well. If you are dealing with, just wanting to learn overall, how to move strategically, excuse me, y'all, how to move like an attorney, how to challenge collections, how to repair your credit, how to handle lawsuits, how to sue for violations, and so much more. Excuse me. Make sure, I'm sorry, I'm sick. Not you, Siri, child. Yeah, everything is in the description box below, but I will see you guys in the next video.